Did Tony Stark's ultimate sacrifice save not only our universe, but the entire multiverse? It's possible. Today, I'm looking at exactly why Tony's demise may have been a good thing in the long run, and how it potentially protected us from an evil version of Tony Stark down the line. Stay to the end, because this will be a fun one. Tony Stark's epic sacrifice effectively saved our universe. Thanos was 2 seconds from snapping everything away and rebuilding the universe in his own image. But Iron Man swooped in, snatched the stones, and delivered his final "I am Iron Man" line before cementing himself as the universe's greatest hero. But now, as we start to explore beyond our universe and discuss the sacred timeline and preventing a big multiversal war, the question becomes, was Iron Man always supposed to die here? Did his sacrifice and death ultimately prevent something much worse down the line? Well, that's what I'm discussing today. Doctor Strange did say that out of his 14 million variations, that this was the only one that they effectively won. But what if there was more to it than that? What if this specific future that Doctor Strange saw, where everything is okay, was the only one where Thanos was defeated, but also where Tony Stark died while doing it? The question becomes why Tony Stark had to die. And look, I'm not naive. I'm certain the MCU wasn't thinking this long term when it came to this moment in particular, but I think there's a fun way to connect the dots by saying Tony's death prevented their world being destroyed in a multiversal war. And that's by saying if Tony had lived past Endgame, then our Earth wouldn't have survived a multiversal incursion thanks to Tony's actions, as we ultimately would become the bad guys. Yes, I'm saying if Tony was alive after Endgame, he would have been the ultimate big bad of the multiverse saga. And before you pelt your screen with rotten fruit, let's discuss this a bit and see if this makes sense. Look at what we know about Tony Stark. His heart is usually in the right place, but he makes terrible decisions when he's paranoid or guilty or both. He balks at people who try to tell him what to do, and his massive ego has led to some major conflicts. Those all aren't great traits. Sure, he's a hero and he's incredibly charismatic and charming, but all that really does is just masks his big character flaws.
I'm just not the hero type.
Look at how he acted after the first Avengers movie. Once Earth was threatened by a larger threat, he immediately became super paranoid and worried about Earth's destruction, going so far as to attempt building a suit of armor around the world. This directly led to Ultron. And then in Civil War, he was so guilty about Ultron that he was willing to endorse the Sokovia Accords. And by the end, he was so emotional in his feelings that he tried to take Bucky out, effectively shattering his relationship with Steve Rogers and breaking up the Avengers. Then Infinity War comes around and Earth simply isn't ready for Thanos, leading to 5 years of horribleness. Take all that into consideration, and I think we can accurately surmise that if a multiversal war started to happen and incursions started to threaten our reality, then Tony would overcorrect and do whatever was necessary in order to protect our universe, even if that meant destroying another universe. In the comics, while Tony is part of the Illuminati, the group gets into the mindset that if it comes down to our Earth or an alternate reality Earth, then they have to choose our Earth for the greater good. And while that's a tough decision to make and not without merit, that kind of spits in the face of the MCU's philosophy of having its heroes exist only in black and white without true shades of gray. As Infinity War hammered home, the heroes don't trade lives. So I think if Tony would have survived Endgame, he would have gone down a dark path that would have led him to becoming the ultimate villain, and that's why he had to go. But let's discuss that further. Would Tony have really turned evil after Endgame? I mean, probably not, but that idea isn't without any comic merit. There are a ton of examples in comics that showcase either our Tony falling down a rabbit hole of bad ideas to make ultimately wrong decisions, or alternate universe versions of Tony Stark that have straight up turned into bad guys. Like, Superior Iron Man is an alternate version of Tony Stark without any of our universe's Tonys morals, who wants to basically control the world. It's a version that's blinded by ego and ambition, and it makes for a very dangerous dangerous opponent. I used to think that superior Iron Man should be part of this ongoing multiverse saga and have a different universe where Iron Man is the main bad guy, and he's adamant about destroying our world to protect his own. I even thought they could have tied that into the existing MCU by making superior Iron Man come out of Earth 838, which is the alternate reality that was featured in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I mean, imagine if that world did have an Iron Man who was part of that Illuminati group, but just wasn't there that day, and then returned to find literally all of them horribly obliterated by a threat from our universe. That would cause anyone to look over at Earth 616 and become wary of us. And while that could still happen, I think if our Tony had survived Endgame, he easily could have gone down the same path. I mean, think about his final action for a second. Tony started in the MCU as a weapons dealer who dealt in weapons of mass destruction, who suddenly had a change of heart about using his weapons to kill people and wanted to do good for the world and become a hero. And that's an overall great arc that Tony followed since his first movie. But then in Endgame, how did he defeat Thanos and his army? He used a weapon of mass destruction to wipe out the evil threat. Like, sure, Thanos' army was presented as mindless aliens, but they were still alive. You're telling me that at that moment, Tony couldn't come up with any better solution rather than kill them all? I only say that that's weird after watching No Way Home, which had its main character be so anti-kill that it makes Tony's actions stand out, especially when you compare it to where Tony's journey started. So I'm saying that if Tony survived after wiping out everyone, that would have started a backslide where he would have been more okay with wiping out threats that promised to hurt our world. Again, I don't think Tony would have gone full evil like Superior Iron Man or like other alternate versions of himself like Iron Maniac, who comes from a world where the death of Stark's friends at the hands of Skrulls turned him into an evil, twisted monster, or even evil Emperor Stark, who basically is a fusion between Doctor Doom and Iron Man that causes a whole ton of problems. But put a pin in that one for a second. More on that in a minute. But what I'm trying to say here is that although our Tony wouldn't have turned flat out evil, I think he would have been a big ultimate villain of the multiversal war by now realizing it's okay to take out enemies that threaten our universe rather than trying to come up with an alternate solution. But now that Tony's out of the picture, our world is safe, right? Wrong, because I think the universe likes to correct itself, and that's where Doctor Doom comes into play. I've been saying for a while now that I think Doctor Doom would be the perfect villain for the MCU, not only because he's incredibly awesome and complex and dangerous with a cool backstory, but also because he represents an evil version of Tony Stark amplified tenfold. Tony Stark is a genius tech egomaniac who builds fancy suits and weaponry. Doctor Doom is a genius tech egomaniac who builds fancy suits and weaponry. See? Two peas in a pod. But Doom does go a bit farther than Tony by not only being incredibly ruthless and has a yearning for total domination and absolute power, but also Doom embraces a mystical side of things that Tony just didn't bother with. Doom is really like the best and worst parts of Iron Man and Doctor Strange, which makes him an unbelievably dangerous bad guy. And while it's easy for the MCU to just say, hey, this guy's like an evil Tony Stark, I think it has the chance to tie in the introduction of Victor Von Doom with Iron Man's sacrifice. So maybe in all of Doctor Strange's futures that he saw, all of them ended with our universe's total destruction in either the hands of Thanos or Tony Stark. He picked the one option that would eliminate both threats completely. But I've always found in these types of stories that the universe always has a way of course correcting itself. Time is a flat circle or something, and what's meant to happen will find a way to happen, potentially with even worse results. By taking Tony Stark off the board, Doctor Strange inadvertently left the door open for an even worse version of Tony Stark to rise up and take the role of Universe Destroyer, and that's where Doctor Doom comes in. I sometimes feel the MCU takes the safest route with its interconnectivity, and when Doom is introduced, I think there's a possibility they'll just say, yep, Doom was in Latveria the whole time and plotting his moves. Oh, you haven't heard of Latveria? Everyone knows Latveria. And that just overall keeps things simple. But I think a better idea would be to say that Doom wasn't in power before the snap and was only able to seize control of the country after half of everyone disappeared. I think that's the best way to handle the character, and it allows for him to become a major threat thanks to the actions of Infinity War and Endgame. So now that Tony Stark isn't around, Doom can be the one to kickstart a major multiversal war. Maybe now he'll be a dictator who rules over his country and wants more power. Because he's lived his life not in charge and only recently was able to take control, he desperately wants to maintain that power and not let anything take it away from him. So when the multiverse starts to become more common knowledge and we get to the point where other Earths threaten to destroy our own, Doom will be the loudest advocate for destroying other threats before they destroy us. Yes, he's definitely a bad guy, but he also, in his own twisted way, just doesn't want to see our Earth destroyed. And his only major flaw is that he's willing to destroy other universes rather than figure out alternate solutions. I mean, Doom is such an egomaniac, you would imagine the thought of other Doctor Dooms out there in the multiverse would irk him. Our Doctor Doom would want to prove that he is without a doubt the only Doom worth saving, leading to his crusade to destroy other universes. He would effectively take the place of Iron Man, who, if he was still alive, would totally think the same thing. Only now, the end results are so much worse, since Doom is a much worse person with more powers. I just like the idea of Doctor Strange being semi-responsible for Tony Stark's death, and the universe course-correcting by introducing someone who has both Tony Stark and Doctor Strange abilities, but is so much worse. That's a fun way to think about it, right? And this would ultimately form the backbone of the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. So the Kang Dynasty will see Kang try to conquer the entire multiverse, and for this movie, Doom will be fighting for everything I just said. In his mind, destroying all the other universes to protect our own is the most important thing to do. And in the end, I imagine Doom could be placed in a similar situation as Tony was in Endgame. Maybe Kang Dynasty will end with Doom in a position to wipe out Kang and stop the multiversal war once and for all. And where Tony sacrificed himself, Doom would do the opposite and destroy the multiverse, create one new Battle World-esque reality, and instill himself God Emperor Doom to rule over everything, thus then setting up Secret Wars to be a proper, sort of faithful adaptation, with Doom in charge and our heroes having to stop him. Look, I really don't like painting Tony Stark as an ultimate bad guy, but if you look at the context of everything and look at what would make the better narrative story for the MCU, then it kind of makes it interesting to think about, right? What do you guys think? Does my reasoning for Tony Stark having to die make any sense? Is there something you would do differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the MCU would be better or worse if Robert Downey Jr. was still playing Tony Stark now? Would it give this current phase more direction, or would his presence suck up time from all the new characters we've gotten in the last few years? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching CBR. See you next time.